A poor girl found a wallet in the park and returned it. The next day, the owner took her to a mansion. What she discovered there. The sunset bathed the streets of the neighborhood in a warm glow, but for Anna, that light only marked the end of another exhausting work day. She walked slowly, her shoulders slumped under the weight of fatigue. She wore her gray, worn-out uniform, with the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, revealing rough, battered hands from constantly scrubbing and cleaning other people's houses. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a real break, a night without worrying about bills, food, or the well-being of her daughter, Sarah. Anna had no time for luxuries or dreams. Ever since Derek, her husband, had abandoned them without saying goodbye, life had been an uphill battle. But every night, when she came home, there was something that kept her going, something that made her get up each morning with a bit of hope. Sarah's smile. Sarah was only 9 years old, but she seemed to understand more than any child should at her age. She was small, with dark, unruly hair, always messy after a long day of playing in the nearby park. For Sarah, that park was her kingdom, her place of freedom, where she could forget about the problems at home. She played alone there, inventing stories of adventures and heroes, although she always returned home before nightfall, just as her mother got back from work. Anna smiled weakly, remembering her daughter's cheerful face as she had said goodbye that morning. There was always something in Sarah's eyes, something that reminded her of a younger version of herself, full of dreams and hopes. But those dreams had faded long ago, and now only reality remained. Bills she couldn't pay, clothes Sarah needed, food that was running low in the pantry. Finally, Anna arrived at her small apartment. It was a modest place with faded walls and old furniture, but it was her refuge. As she opened the door, she saw that Sarah hadn't returned from the park yet. She's probably lost track of time again, Anna thought as she dropped her bag on the sofa. Instead of resting, as her body begged her to do, she began preparing a simple dinner. Although the pantry was nearly empty, she managed to scrape together something with the little she had. A few minutes later, she heard the door open softly, and Sarah came running in with an unusual excitement on her face. "Mom, look what I found," Sarah exclaimed breathlessly, pulling something from her backpack. Anna turned around and to her surprise saw her daughter holding a wallet. It was large, made of brown leather, and looked expensive. A chill ran down Anna's spine as she watched Sarah open it and reveal its contents. It was full of money. Not just a little, but more than Anna had ever seen at once in her entire life. Anna's mind began to race in 1,000 directions. That money could change so many things. She could pay the bills, stock the pantry, maybe even buy Sarah the school clothes she so desperately needed. But part of her knew it wasn't that simple. "I found it in the park, Mom. It was just lying there on the ground, near the bench where I always sit," Sarah explained, a mix of excitement and confusion in her voice. Anna approached slowly, still in disbelief. She took the wallet and examined it. Inside, besides the money, was an ID with the name Matthew. She didn't recognize the name, but something about the quality of the wallet and the money made her think this man didn't belong to her world. Silence filled the small room as they both contemplated the situation. Anna took a deep breath. She knew what she had to do, but the weight of her life, of all the sleepless nights, the unpaid bills, began to press on her heart. What if... "Mom, what are we going to do?" Sarah asked, with a mix of innocence and maturity in her gaze. Anna looked at her daughter, and in that moment all the exhaustion and frustration of the world seemed to fade away. She knew they couldn't keep the money. Something more important was at stake. Since Derek had left them, Anna had done everything she could to instill values in Sarah that he had never respected: honesty, integrity, and hard work. If they kept that money, what would she be teaching her daughter? "We're going to return it, Sarah," Anna said finally, with a firmness that masked the pain of giving up such an opportunity. Sarah nodded without a word. She had expected that answer from her mother, but still, the reality of the decision was hard to accept. Anna looked at her daughter, and for the first time in a long while, felt a mix of pride and sadness. She knew they had made the right decision, but also knew that once again, they would face life without shortcuts. Anna put the wallet away in a drawer, determined to find the owner the next day. That night, as she prepared Sarah for bed, she couldn't help but wonder who the owner of that money was. And more importantly, how would he react when he saw them? But beyond those questions in her heart, she knew one thing for certain. Sarah, her kind and noble Sarah, had learned an important lesson that day, one Anna hoped would guide her for the rest of her life. As she turned off the light in her daughter's room and kissed her forehead, Anna whispered, "I'm so proud of you, my love." Sarah smiled in the darkness, and although the shadows of the future were uncertain, that night they both slept with the peace of knowing they had done the right thing. The sun had barely risen when Anna got out of bed. The first light of day timidly filtered through the worn curtains of the small room she shared with her daughter. Sarah was still sleeping soundly, wrapped in her blankets, while Anna mentally prepared herself for what they had to do. The weight of the decision to return the wallet had rested on her shoulders all night, and even though she knew it was the right thing to do, a part of her couldn't stop thinking about what they were giving up. She approached the drawer where she had stored the wallet and carefully took it out, feeling once again the temptation she had pushed aside the night before. She opened it, checking its contents again. Bills, many bills, and the ID that belonged to a man named Matthew. We could do so much with this money, she thought for a moment, but then shook her head, trying to push those thoughts away. It was dangerous to think like that. She knew returning the wallet was the right thing to do, and it was a lesson Sarah needed to learn. But beyond that, Anna was committed to teaching her daughter that no matter how hard life got, principles had to prevail. When Sarah woke up, Anna had already prepared a simple breakfast, some toast and tea. As they ate in silence, Sarah watched her mother with curiosity. She had felt the tension the night before and could now see something weighing on Anna's mind. "Are we going to return the wallet today?" Sarah finally asked, breaking the silence. Anna nodded, trying to appear calmer than she felt. "Yes, we will. After all, that money isn't ours, and whoever lost it must be worried," Anna replied with a calmness that didn't reflect her true unease. Sarah nodded, though the idea of returning such a large sum of money made her stomach twist. She was just a child, and while she understood the importance of honesty, she also knew her mother's life wasn't easy. The thought that the money could ease her mother's struggles made her hesitate, but at the same time, Anna's lessons about doing the right thing echoed in her mind. After breakfast, Anna and Sarah began to prepare to leave. Anna, though nervous, tried to project confidence. She looked up the address from the wallet's ID, and upon seeing the street name, she instantly knew it was not a neighborhood they were familiar with. It was an area where the rich lived, a part of the city that had always been out of their reach. The mansion was located on a hill, surrounded by other properties that seemed like they belonged to another world. "Mum, do you think they'll let us in at such a big house?" Sarah asked, looking up at her mother with concern as they left home. Anna smiled faintly, even though Sarah's question reflected her own fears. "I don't know, sweetie, but we're doing what we must. It doesn't matter how big or luxurious the house is. What's important is that we're returning something that isn't ours." The walk to the mansion was long, and as they went, Anna couldn't stop thinking about what they might find when they arrived. She imagined a rich man, perhaps cold, used to dealing with people like them in a distant manner. She wondered how it would feel to stand before someone who had so much when they barely scraped by. Yet, the fear of being looked down on only strengthened her resolve. Finally, they reached the part of town where the houses began to change drastically. The streets were wide, lined with trees and well-manicured gardens. As they moved forward, the homes grew larger and more luxurious. Sarah walked in silence, marveling at the grandeur of the mansions, while Anna felt her heart race with each step. When they finally arrived at the address listed on the ID, Anna and Sarah stopped in front of a massive iron gate. Behind it stood a multi-story mansion, surrounded by a meticulously kept garden. Everything seemed like it was straight out of a movie, something Anna had only seen in magazines or on TV. A knot formed in her stomach. "Wow, it's huge," Sarah murmured, impressed. Anna took a deep breath and looked at her daughter with a mixture of pride and nerves. "It is, but remember, it doesn't matter how big the house is or how wealthy the people who live here are. We're doing this because it's the right thing," she said, as if reminding herself as well. With a determined gesture, Anna pressed the intercom button next to the gate. A few seconds passed, feeling like an eternity, before a woman's voice responded. "Who is it?" Anna swallowed hard before replying. "We're here to return a wallet that belongs to someone who lives here, to Matthew," she said firmly, though her heart pounded in her chest. There was a brief silence on the other end of the intercom before the gate slowly began to open. Anna took Sarah's hand, and together they crossed the threshold. As they walked down the long driveway lined with perfectly arranged flowers, Anna couldn't help but feel small, almost insignificant amidst so much opulence. Yet her conviction to do the right thing kept her steady. When they reached the main door, a well-dressed woman who appeared to be part of the household staff greeted them. She looked them up and down with a mixture of curiosity and disdain, as if unsure why they were there. "What do you need?" she asked, her voice barely hiding her skepticism. Anna, undeterred, held up the wallet. "My daughter found this in the park. It belongs to someone named Matthew. We're here to return it." The woman raised an eyebrow, surprised by her answer. After a brief, uncomfortable pause, she let them inside and led them to a waiting room. The place felt like a museum. The walls were covered in landscape paintings and portraits, and the antique furniture looked too valuable to be used. While they waited, Anna couldn't help but notice that despite all the wealth surrounding them, the mansion felt cold, empty, as if time had stopped there. Sarah, in her innocence, looked around in awe. She couldn't imagine living in such a place, but there was something about the atmosphere that made her uneasy. "Mom, why does everything feel so too sad here?" Sarah whispered. Anna didn't know how to answer. She just knew something wasn't right about the place, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. Before she could think more on it, the door to the room opened, and a tired-looking man walked in. His hair was slightly disheveled, and though he was well-dressed, there was something in his expression that hinted at deep, emotional exhaustion. It was Matthew. He looked at Anna and Sarah with a neutral expression, but when he saw the wallet in Anna's hands, a faint sign of surprise crossed his face. "Did you find my wallet?" he asked, his voice low and rough. Anna nodded, handing it to him with a humble gesture. "My daughter found it in the park. We thought you'd want it back." Matthew took the wallet, glancing at the small girl who had returned it. An awkward silence filled the air as he processed what had just happened. It wasn't common for someone to return a wallet full of money without asking for anything in return, especially someone who, by the looks of them, seemed to need it. "Thank you," Matthew finally said, with a sincerity that, although cold, didn't go unnoticed by Anna. Sarah looked directly into his eyes, and unknowingly, something in her innocence seemed to touch a forgotten corner of Matthew's heart. The silence stretched across the mansion's living room, a space so large and elegant that Sarah couldn't help but feel small. The high ceilings and walls adorned with paintings and portraits felt almost overwhelming. Anna, sitting on the edge of one of the velvet sofas, observed every detail with a mix of discomfort and awe. The last time she had been in such a luxurious place was many years ago, at a brief social event when she was still married to Derek, before everything fell apart. But that memory felt distant, as if it belonged to another life. Matthew moved slowly, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. He seemed to be measuring his words and actions, carefully observing Anna and her daughter, who were still looking around with curiosity. Finally, he sat in front of them, on a chair that looked fit for royalty, though his demeanor didn't reflect that grandeur. Anna, nervous, searched for something to say. The cold, quiet atmosphere of the mansion made her feel out of place, and Matthew's distant gaze only heightened that feeling. "We're glad you got your wallet back," she finally said, breaking the silence. Matthew looked at her, nodding slightly. "I didn't expect anyone to return it, especially someone who, I suppose, could have used it for their own problems," he replied, still watching them with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The comment, though not entirely offensive, hit Anna in an uncomfortable way. It was true that the money could have made a big difference in their lives, but that wasn't the kind of person she was. Anna knew Matthew was used to a world where people took what wasn't theirs when given the chance, but she wasn't like that. She was different. She cared, and she wanted to give back. She didn't want to be a burden. and she didn't want Sarah growing up with those values. "We're not looking for any kind of reward, if that's what you're implying," Anna said firmly but respectfully. "My daughter just did what was right." Sarah, who had been quiet until that moment, nodded energetically. "Yes, Mom always tells me we shouldn't keep what isn't ours," she added, looking up at Matthew with an innocent smile. For a moment something seemed to shift in Matthew's face. His expression, which had been distant and cold, softened slightly. He looked at the little girl with a kind of bewilderment. There was something about Sarah in her openness and purity that disarmed him. For a second he thought of his own daughter, the one he had lost years ago, and felt a pang of nostalgia he hadn't experienced in a long time. "You're right, little one. Not many would have done what you did," he finally said, in a softer voice than Anna had expected. Sarah smiled, and Anna felt a strange mix of relief and surprise as the tension in the room seemed to ease slightly. "I'd like to offer you something as a thank you," Matthew continued, returning to his more formal tone. "I know you're not asking for anything, but I'd feel better if you accepted." Anna tensed up again. She knew this could become uncomfortable. She didn't want Matthew to think they were there for his money, but she also knew she couldn't outright reject the offer without seeming rude. "Really, it's not necessary," Anna began to say, but Matthew interrupted her. "It's not just about money. I'd like to invite you to stay for a while. There's something—" Matthew hesitated for a moment, as if unsure how to express what he was thinking. "There's something about you that reminds me of things I haven't felt in a long time." Anna wasn't sure how to interpret those words. There was something odd in the way Matthew looked at them, not in a discomforting way, but rather as if he were searching for something he had lost. She looked at her daughter, who was still gazing around the house with bright eyes, fascinated by the paintings, the books on the shelves, and the imposing decor. "Please stay a moment," Matthew insisted, and this time his voice sounded almost vulnerable. Anna, surprised by the change in Matthew's tone, nodded slowly. Despite the initial coldness of the mansion, something about Matthew made her feel like there was more beneath that distant exterior. "All right, we'll stay for a bit," Anna responded, still cautious. Matthew, nodding, offered them something to drink, and as they waited, Sarah got up from the sofa and walked over to one of the large windows overlooking the garden. Her eyes lit up as she saw the enormous green space filled with exotic flowers and crystal-clear fountains. "Mom, look, it's a huge garden!" Sarah exclaimed, with the excitement of a child seeing a new world for the first time. Matthew, who had been watching Sarah from his chair, smiled for the first time since they had met. "Would you like to go see it?" he asked, addressing the little girl. Sarah, with a smile so wide it seemed to brighten the entire room, nodded eagerly. "Yes, please." Matthew stood up and, with a gesture, guided them toward the garden. Anna followed, still cautious, but sensing there was more to this man than what she had initially seen. The garden was indeed impressive. There were stone paths winding through the plants, and fountains that filled the air with the soft sound of running water. Sarah ran among the flowers, laughing as she explored the place. Anna, who had been watching her daughter, turned to Matthew. "It's a beautiful place," she said, though she still felt that the garden, as beautiful as it was, couldn't hide the air of sadness that seemed to envelop the mansion. Matthew nodded, watching Sarah with an expression Anna couldn't quite decipher. "My daughter used to play here," he murmured almost to himself. Anna remained silent, feeling that she had touched on something deep in the man's life. She didn't know much about him, but she was beginning to understand that the money and luxury surrounding him couldn't fill the emptiness in his heart. "Sarah is a special child," Matthew added, breaking the silence. "She reminds me so much of her—" Anna didn't need him to say more. She knew Matthew was talking about a loss that still consumed him, though he wouldn't openly admit it. Not wanting to intrude, she decided to change the subject, but her heart felt empathy for him. Time passed as Sarah explored the garden, and Matthew began to show a small opening in his personality. What had started as a tense and formal situation now felt more human, more approachable. Anna, though still cautious, began to see Matthew as someone who, despite his wealth, was broken inside, and she felt an unexpected desire to understand more about him. As the afternoon passed and the sun set behind the trees in the garden, Matthew escorted them back to the living room. Before Anna could thank him and say goodbye, Matthew said something that caught them by surprise. "I'd like for you to come back another day. Sarah seems to enjoy this place, and well, I'd like to see you both again." Anna hadn't expected the invitation. She didn't know what to say at first, but Sarah, who was now by her side, looked up at Matthew with a big smile and answered before her mother could. "Of course, I'd love to come back." Matthew smiled again, and for a moment, Anna thought there was something in him that had been waiting to come to light. A lonely man who perhaps just needed a bit of light in his life. "All right, we'll come back," Anna finally said with a hint of surprise in her voice. They said their goodbyes to Matthew, and the woman who had greeted them escorted them to the exit. As they crossed the iron gate and returned to the reality of their own world, Anna couldn't help but think about the change she had seen in Matthew, and how that strange connection seemed to have begun to heal something in him. Sarah, with her usual energy, chatted excitedly all the way home, while Anna walked in silence, reflecting on what had happened. Life had always been hard for her and her daughter, but now she felt that, somehow, that simple act of honesty had begun to intertwine them with the life of a broken man. And that, she thought, could change everything. The next day brought with it an air of expectation and surprise that Anna couldn't ignore. Matthew's parting words, "I'd like you to come back another day," echoed in her mind. Anna, used to the coldness and distance of wealthy people, would never have imagined that a man like him, who seemed so distant and damaged, would open that door to them. Anna woke up with confused thoughts. Sarah, on the other hand, couldn't contain her excitement. She talked non-stop during breakfast, wondering when they would return to the mansion. For her, the garden had been a magical place full of adventures, and Matthew, though mysterious, had made a good impression on her. She saw him as a kind man, despite the sadness in his eyes. "Mom, are we going back today?" Sarah asked with her usual enthusiasm as she devoured her toast. Anna smiled faintly. She didn't want Sarah to get too attached to the idea, but she couldn't deny that Matthew had shown them genuine kindness. "I don't know, Sarah. I don't want you to think we can just go there whenever we want. It's not our home, and I don't want you to get the wrong idea," Anna replied, trying to manage her daughter's expectations. But Sarah, with her ever-optimistic spirit, persisted. "But Matthew likes us, right?" she said, smiling brightly in the small kitchen. Anna sighed. The truth was, even she didn't know what to think. The connection she had felt with Matthew the day before had been unexpected. A broken man like her, though for different reasons. Perhaps there was something in the way their lives had crossed paths that was bigger than she understood at that moment. "Yes, it seems like he likes us," Anna finally replied, "but we need to give him space. We can't just show up at his house." Despite her words, Anna couldn't deny that part of her also wanted to go back. There was something about Matthew, a mix of mystery and sadness, that made her feel she needed to know him better. But she didn't dare admit it, not even to herself. Later that morning, as Anna tried to focus on her daily tasks, the sound of the doorbell pulled her from her thoughts. Curiously, she went to answer the door, and to her surprise, a uniformed man handed her a white envelope, with Sarah written in elegant handwriting on the front. "For me?" Sarah asked excitedly as Anna handed her the envelope. Opening it, they found a formal invitation inside. Matthew was inviting them to return to his mansion that same day, to spend the afternoon in the garden and enjoy some tea. Anna, who was already used to life's surprises, couldn't help but smile at Matthew's persistence. "Can we go, Mom?" Sarah asked, her eyes shining. Anna thought about it for a moment. She didn't want Sarah to feel too attached to the idea of spending time in a place that wasn't theirs. But on the other hand, she knew that rejecting the invitation might seem rude, and she was also curious about what more she might discover by spending more time with Matthew. "Well, I suppose we can go for a while," Anna finally said, with a smile that made Sarah jump for joy. Later that day, mother and daughter once again made their way to the imposing mansion. This time, the long path to the front door didn't feel as intimidating to Anna, though the opulence still reminded her of how distant that world was from hers. However, Matthew's kindness the previous day had shown her that wealth didn't always come with arrogance. When they arrived, they were greeted again by the woman who seemed to manage the household, but this time her gaze was less disdainful. She kindly directed them to the garden where Matthew was already waiting for them. The garden, just as Sarah remembered, was full of color and life. The flowers gleamed under the afternoon sun, and a table had been set up near one of the fountains. Matthew was there, sitting quietly, admiring the scenery. When he saw Anna and Sarah approaching, a faint smile crossed his face. "Thank you for coming," Matthew said, standing up to greet them. "I'm glad you accepted the invitation." Anna immediately noticed that Matthew seemed different today, more relaxed, less distant. She couldn't help but wonder if Sarah's presence and the connection they had formed the day before were beginning to have an impact on him. "Thank you for inviting us. Sarah's been excited all morning," Anna replied, smiling as she looked at her daughter, who had already run off toward the flowers. Matthew nodded and sat down again, inviting Anna to join him at the table. "She's a special girl," Matthew said, watching as Sarah explored the garden with endless energy. "She reminds me of my daughter." Anna looked at him, sensing that this was one of the first times Matthew spoke openly about his past. She knew it wasn't her place to pry, but she couldn't help feeling curious. "What was she like?" Anna asked gently, not wanting to push. Matthew remained silent for a moment, as if searching for the right words. His face, which had shown a brief moment of peace, darkened again. "She was my world," he finally said, his voice heavy with pain. "Smart, curious, just like Sarah. She had an energy that could light up any room." Anna noticed the sadness in his eyes and decided not to press further. Despite his pain, Matthew was opening up, and that was a big step. "She must have been a wonderful child," Anna said softly. Matthew nodded slowly, looking at the ground for a moment before lifting his gaze and changing the subject. "Sarah seems to enjoy the garden. I'm glad she can find a place here to run and play," Matthew said, offering a small smile as he watched the girl darting among the flowers. Anna observed him closely. There was something about Matthew that made her feel that behind all the sadness and coldness was a deeply good person, someone who had been hurt and who, for some reason, was beginning to heal thanks to Sarah's presence. The afternoon passed peacefully. Matthew, although still reserved, was more open and conversational than the day before. He shared some stories about his life before the tragedy, his passion for travel and architecture, things that had excited him before the pain consumed him. Anna, on her part, also shared some anecdotes about her life with Sarah, though she avoided talking about Derek and the problems she had faced since he left them. As the sun began to set, the peacefulness of the garden was palpable. Sarah, exhausted but happy, returned to her mother after hours of play. "Can we come back another day, Mom?" Sarah asked excitedly, looking at both Anna and Matthew. Before Anna could respond, Matthew spoke. "You're welcome to come any time. This place feels less empty with you here." Anna couldn't help but smile at those words. There was something genuine in Matthew's offer, something that made it seem less like a courtesy and more like a need. It seemed like he needed them as much as they, in some way, needed someone like him. "Thank you, Matthew. We'll see if we can come again soon," Anna said gratefully but with caution. While she appreciated the invitation, she didn't want this to become an emotional dependency, neither for Sarah nor for herself. When it was time to leave, Matthew escorted them to the door once again. As Anna said goodbye, she felt that something had shifted in the relationship they were building. Matthew had not only shown his more human side, but had also opened a door that had seemed closed forever. As they returned home, the sky was growing darker, but Anna felt that something new had begun to emerge in their lives, something that could possibly change everything. The air in the mansion was filled with a mix of nostalgia and sadness that Anna was beginning to perceive more clearly as she spent time there. Despite the beauty of the garden and the grandeur of the house, there was something in the atmosphere that constantly reminded her that this place, though full of luxury, was also full of emotional scars. The conversations with Matthew, while pleasant, were never without a hint of melancholy. Anna and Sarah continued visiting the mansion regularly, but as the visits became more frequent, Anna began to notice small details about Matthew's life that intrigued and worried her at the same time. Margaret, the housekeeper, seemed to be the key to unlocking some of those mysteries. One afternoon, while Sarah was playing in the garden as usual, Anna decided to stay in the kitchen to talk with Margaret. The woman, always attentive and helpful, seemed to have been in the mansion for many years. Anna felt that Margaret knew more than she let on, and after several visits, their relationship had grown close enough to discuss more personal matters. "This house, it feels so empty despite how beautiful it is," Anna commented as she helped Margaret prepare tea. Margaret looked at her for a moment, as if deciding whether or not to say what she knew. Finally, she sighed, setting the teapot aside for a moment. "It is. This house has seen a lot of happiness, but also a lot of sadness," she said, with a melancholic tone. Sensing that Margaret was willing to share more, Anna gently continued the conversation. "Matthew told me a little about his daughter and how much her loss hurts him." Margaret nodded slowly. "Miss Claudia," she murmured with a sigh, "she was a wonderful child, just like your daughter Sarah. Always running through the garden, always filling this house with laughter. Miss Claudia and Mr. Matthew were inseparable." Anna could picture it. A little girl just like Sarah running through the same flower paths, filling the space with her energy and vitality. But there was something more, something Margaret seemed hesitant to mention, as if saying it would unearth old ghosts. "What happened to her?" Anna asked, knowing the question was delicate but feeling it was important to know the truth. Margaret remained silent for a few seconds, her hands trembling slightly as she held the teapot. "An accident, a day that changed everything. Mr. Matthew was never the same again. He lost more than just his daughter that day. He lost his joy, his will to live," she said, lowering her gaze. "Since then, this house has become a cold and lonely place. Miss Claudia was the light of his life, and when she went out, so did he." Anna felt a lump in her throat hearing the story. Now she understood more clearly why Matthew was the way he was. That pain, that loss, had left him trapped in a sadness that had isolated him from the world. Yet Sarah's presence seemed to be bringing back some of that lost light. "And his wife?" Anna asked, realizing that up until that moment she hadn't heard anything about Claudia's mother. Margaret pressed her lips together, as if that topic was even more delicate than the death of the child. She left shortly after the accident. She couldn't bear the guilt and the pain. It's not something we talk about much in this house, but Mr. Matthew never forgave her for it. After losing his daughter, he also lost her. Since then, he's been alone. Until now," Margaret said, looking at Anna with a meaningful expression. Anna remained silent, processing all the information. The weight of what Matthew had endured in his life was far greater than she had imagined. It wasn't just the loss of a daughter. It was the destruction of an entire life, an entire family. Anna felt a deep empathy for him, and at the same time, a growing concern about the influence that her and Sarah's presence might be having on him. "He seems to be better," Anna commented cautiously. "At least since Sarah started coming here, I've noticed he's more open." Margaret nodded, smiling slightly. "Your daughter has brought a ray of light into this house, something I haven't seen in years. Don't get me wrong, Miss Anna, but I believe you and Sarah are helping Mr. Matthew more than you realize. However," Margaret hesitated for a moment before continuing, "there is someone who isn't so happy about this situation." Anna frowned, concerned. "What do you mean?" Margaret lowered her voice as if afraid someone else might hear. "Miss Elizabeth, Mr. Matthew's sister. She's been managing the family business since the child's death. She's always been ambitious, very controlling. Ever since you and Sarah started coming here, she's been more nervous than usual. I don't know exactly what she's thinking, but I can tell you she's not happy with the changes she's seeing in her brother." Anna didn't know how to interpret that. She had met Elizabeth during one of her previous visits, but the woman had been polite and courteous, albeit distant. Could it be that Elizabeth saw Anna and Sarah as a threat to her control over Matthew? Before Anna could ask more questions, Sarah burst into the kitchen, her face flushed with excitement. "Mom, you've got to see the new game I made up in the garden," she exclaimed, gently tugging her mother's hand. Anna smiled and nodded, ready to follow her daughter. But as she left the kitchen, she couldn't help casting one last glance at Margaret, who watched her with a look of warning. The rest of the afternoon passed normally. Matthew seemed more relaxed than usual, and as he watched Sarah play in the garden, Anna could see a faint smile on his face. It seemed that the sadness that had consumed him for so many years was beginning to fade, even if only little by little. Anna wondered if it was really possible for Sarah and her to help him heal. However, as the afternoon wore on and the sunlight began to fade, Anna couldn't shake Margaret's words from her mind. Elizabeth, Matthew's sister, was watching, and though she hadn't shown any direct hostility yet, Anna felt that something was coming. When it was time to leave, Matthew walked Anna and Sarah to the door as he usually did. Sarah, exhausted from all the playing, smiled as she said goodbye to Matthew, and Anna thanked him once again for his hospitality. "We'll see you soon, right, Matthew?" Sarah asked with her usual energy. Matthew smiled and nodded, but before Anna could add anything, Elizabeth's voice echoed from the hallway. "Matthew, we need to talk about the business matters. It's urgent," she said, with a tone of impatience that didn't go unnoticed by Anna. Matthew nodded slightly, looking at his sister with an expression that mixed exhaustion and resignation. "Of course, Elizabeth, I'll be right there," he replied before turning back to Anna and Sarah. "Take care." Anna and Sarah left the mansion, but Anna couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. She knew Matthew was beginning to open up, to heal, but she also knew that Elizabeth wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. As they walked home, the weight of the situation began to settle on Anna's shoulders. She knew that her presence in Matthew's life was having an impact, but she also felt that they were stepping into dangerous territory, one where family ties, power, and control would play a crucial role. The shadow of Matthew's past wasn't just alive in his heart, it was embodied by his sister, Elizabeth. And Anna had the unsettling feeling that soon it would all come to a head. The insistent sound of the doorbell caught Anna's attention as she cleaned the kitchen. It had been a long day, and though the visits to Matthew's mansion brought hope and light into her life, the reality of her routine still weighed heavily on her. At first she thought it might be Sarah, who had forgotten something after her trip to the park, but when she opened the door, her heart stopped for a moment. Standing there with a smile Anna didn't recognize was Derek, the man who had disappeared years ago, leaving her and Sarah to fend for themselves, seemed to have come out of nowhere. He wore new clothes, his hair was neatly styled, and there was a gleam in his eyes that Anna knew wasn't one of regret. Derek had always been a handsome man, but behind his appearance was the same selfish man she remembered all too well. "Anna," Derek said, his voice soft, loaded with false promises. "It's been a long time. Can we talk?" Anna felt her entire body tense. She hadn't expected to see him, let alone deal with the mixed emotions his presence brought. Her first reaction was to slam the door in his face, but the thought of Sarah stopped her. She couldn't just ignore him, not when her daughter had asked about him so many times, secretly hoping that her father would return. She couldn't let Derek reappear in their lives without confronting him. "What are you doing here, Derek?" Anna asked, her voice tense. Derek smiled as if he had done nothing wrong, as if the years of abandonment were just a minor misunderstanding. "I came to see you and Sarah. I've changed, Anna. I'm here to make things right. I want to get my family back." Anna felt the anger rise inside her. Get his family back. After all these years of silence and abandonment, now he showed up with empty promises. She knew she couldn't let herself be driven by anger in that moment, but the wounds Derek had left in her life were still open. "Get your family back," Anna repeated incredulously. "After disappearing without a word for years, you can't just show up and expect everything to be okay, Derek." Derek raised his hands in a gesture of peace. I know, I made mistakes, big mistakes, but I'm here now. I want to do the right thing." Anna stared at him, searching for any sign of sincerity in his face, but she knew Derek too well. There was something behind his return, something that had nothing to do with wanting to be a good father. And then, as if fate were playing a cruel joke, she remembered her recent visits to Matthew's mansion. Had Derek heard about them? "Why now?" Anna asked, crossing her arms. "Why are you coming back after all this time?" Derek smiled with a coldness that made Anna shiver. "I've heard things, Anna, things about you and that rich man you've been spending time with. It seems like things have been going well for you. I thought maybe we could start over, give Sarah the life we always wanted, a better one." And there it was, the truth, the motivation behind his sudden remorse. Derek hadn't come back out of love or regret. He had come because he thought Anna had found a way out of poverty, and he wanted to take advantage of that. Anna felt a mix of disgust and rage at Derek's shamelessness. For a moment she thought about how her life might have been if he hadn't abandoned them. But that life, those dreams, had been destroyed long ago, and she had had to rebuild everything on her own. "So that's it," Anna muttered through clenched teeth. "You didn't come for Sarah, you didn't come for me. You just came because you think you can get something out of this." Derek, realizing that his true intentions had been revealed, quickly changed his tone. "Anna, please don't see it that way. I want to be in Sarah's life. She deserves to have her father, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make that happen." "No," Anna interrupted, raising her voice. "You can't just show up out of nowhere and expect us to welcome you back with open arms. Sarah isn't an opportunity for you to reinsert yourself into our lives whenever it's convenient for you. She deserves better, someone better." Derek remained silent for a moment, assessing the situation. Then, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, he nodded. "Well, we'll see what Sarah thinks. Maybe she'll want to hear what I have to say." Anna's heart sank. She knew Sarah had dreamed of her father's return, and now he was going to exploit that innocence. The fear that Derek could manipulate her daughter into accepting him again made Anna's stomach churn. She knew she couldn't let him hurt them again, but she also knew that Sarah had a right to know her father. It was an impossible situation, and Anna found herself trapped between rage and despair. "If you dare hurt her," Anna began, her voice trembling with emotion. "I won't," Derek interrupted with a cold calmness. "I just want what's best for her, and for you." Anna stared at him, trying to find any truth in his words, but all she saw was the same manipulative man who had once torn her life apart. Finally, she closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to control her anger. "Don't interfere in our lives, Derek, not without my consent. If Sarah wants to see you, it will be her decision, but don't manipulate her." Derek smiled as if he had won a small victory. "I'll do it right, Anna, I promise." With that, Derek turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone at the door. Anna remained there, watching his figure disappear in the distance, feeling the weight of the past settle heavily on her shoulders. She knew Derek's reappearance would complicate everything, and she dreaded what might come next. Later that night, while Anna was preparing dinner, Sarah came into the kitchen, full of energy as always. "Mom, who was the man that was here earlier?" she asked curiously. Anna felt a knot in her stomach. She didn't want to lie to Sarah, but she also didn't want her daughter to get her hopes up, thinking that her father had changed. "It was your dad, Sarah," Anna answered cautiously, bracing for the inevitable reaction. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise and excitement. "Dad, really? He came back?" Anna nodded, but quickly added, "Yes, but I want you to understand something, sweetie. I don't know what his true intentions are. I just want you to be prepared. Your dad left a long time ago, and he hasn't been here for us, so we have to be careful." Sarah, though excited, nodded slowly, understanding her mother's words. "Will we see him again?" she asked. Anna sighed. "If you want, you can see him. But it's important to remember that Dad hasn't always been there. I don't want him to hurt you." Sarah thought for a moment, and though excitement still shone in her eyes, Anna saw that her daughter was beginning to grasp the complexity of the situation. That night, as Sarah slept, Anna lay awake in the darkness, wondering what Derek's return meant for them. She knew he hadn't changed, and that his presence would only bring more problems. And as she stared at the ceiling, she felt the shadows of the past creeping back into her life, threatening to destroy everything she had built. The atmosphere at Matthew's mansion had changed in the past few weeks. What had once been a gloomy place filled with sad memories was now starting to show small signs of life. Sarah's laughter echoed through the gardens, and Matthew, though still reserved, showed slight improvements in his attitude. Anna noticed it too, but she couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease surrounding them. She knew Derek's return would bring trouble, and something about Elizabeth's, Matthew's sister's, behavior made her nervous. One day, after a long afternoon of playing in the garden, Matthew approached Anna while Sarah ran among the flowers. There was something in his eyes that suggested he needed to talk about something important, but he didn't know how to start. "Anna, do you have a moment?" Matthew asked, his voice more serious than usual. Anna nodded, taking a seat on one of the garden benches, while Matthew sat next to her. She could feel the tension in the air, and that worried her. "Of course, Matthew. Is everything all right?" Matthew sighed, gazing out at the horizon before speaking. "I've noticed that something has been changing since Derek reappeared in your life. I don't know much about him, but I'm worried about what this might mean for you and Sarah." Anna looked at him gratefully, appreciating his concern but also feeling the weight of the situation. "Derek," Anna began, choosing her words carefully. "He's been a great source of pain for us. I don't know why he's back, but I know it's not for the right reasons. He's looking for something, and I'm afraid it has nothing to do with us." Matthew nodded, understanding what Anna was saying. He could see the fear in her eyes, and it only heightened his concern for her and the influence Derek might have on their lives. "If there's anything I can do to help," Matthew began, but Anna interrupted him. "I don't want you to get involved, Matthew. This is something I have to handle on my own. I don't want you to be dragged into my problems," Anna said, though a part of her knew that Derek wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. Matthew looked at her with tenderness and determination. "Anna, you're already involved in my life, and so is Sarah. I can't just look the other way." Anna looked at him grateful but also filled with uncertainty. She knew Derek wouldn't give up easily, and now she was in a more complicated situation than she had imagined. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Derek was figuring out how to take advantage of the situation. He knew the key to getting what he wanted was to drive a wedge between Anna and Matthew, and the opportunity came in the form of an unexpected ally, Elizabeth, Matthew's sister. Elizabeth had been closely watching the relationship between Matthew, Anna, and Sarah, and she was not happy with what she saw. She had spent much of her life maintaining control of the family business, while her brother isolated himself in his grief. The appearance of Anna and Sarah in their lives threatened to destabilize everything Elizabeth had built. Not only did she fear losing financial control of the family, but she also worried that Matthew would make emotional decisions that could jeopardize the family fortune. Elizabeth knew that Derek was the weak link in all of this, and she decided to approach him to form an alliance. She knew that he, like her, had ulterior motives, and that together they could manipulate the situation to their advantage. One afternoon, as Derek walked through the streets, thinking about how to approach Matthew, he received an unexpected call from Elizabeth. "We need to talk," Elizabeth said with an icy tone. Curious, Derek accepted the invitation, and a few hours later they met at a discreet restaurant on the outskirts of the city. Elizabeth was impeccably dressed, as always, and her gaze was calculating, which made Derek feel cautious. "I don't know why you want to see me, but I'm listening," Derek said, as Elizabeth took a sip of her coffee. "I know why you've come back into Anna's life," Elizabeth replied directly, without beating around the bush. "And I know what you're after." Derek smiled slyly. "And what do you think I'm after?" Elizabeth stared at him, not blinking. "Money, stability, taking advantage of the situation to get something out of it. You're not the first opportunist I've seen, but we have something in common, Derek. Neither of us wants Anna to get any closer to my brother." Derek was silent for a moment, surprised by Elizabeth's frankness. He knew she was ambitious, but he hadn't expected her to be so direct about her intentions. "Keep talking," Derek responded, intrigued. Elizabeth leaned her elbows on the table, moving slightly closer to Derek. "My brother is vulnerable, and Anna is starting to gain his trust. If things keep going this way, she could end up controlling more than you realize, and we can't let that happen. I need someone who can separate them, and you, Derek, are that person. I want you to use your influence over Anna and Sarah to create conflict. Make my brother doubt her. Make him think Anna is only after his money." Derek smiled, now understanding what Elizabeth was proposing. "And in return, what do I get?" Elizabeth smiled coldly. "Money. A lot of money. If you manage to push them apart, I'll make sure you get a substantial payout. But it's not just that. If you play your cards right, you could gain even more. Imagine what you could get if we make Matthew see you as an ally in all this." Derek thought about the possibilities. He knew he wasn't the best person, but he also knew that if he played his cards right, he could get a lot out of this situation. "Agreed," he finally responded. "You've got a deal." Elizabeth smiled, satisfied that she had found her accomplice. She knew the situation between Matthew and Anna was at a delicate point, and Derek was the perfect tool to destroy that relationship before it became too strong. In the following days, Derek began to get closer and closer to Sarah, trying to win her trust. He brought her small gifts, talked about how much he missed her, and tried to present himself as the repentant father who wanted to make up for his mistakes. Sarah, though excited about her father's presence, also felt a certain discomfort. There was something about the way he talked about Matthew that she didn't like. "Mum, why doesn't Dad want us to go see Matthew?" Sarah asked one afternoon, after Derek made some snide remarks about Matthew's wealth. Anna, who had been avoiding the subject, finally decided it was time to talk to her daughter. "Sarah, your dad has his own ideas about what's best for us, but you and I know that Matthew has been very good to us. Don't let anyone make you doubt that," Anna responded, her heart heavy. She knew Derek was starting to influence Sarah's life, and she feared that he might drive her away from Matthew, who had, in her heart, begun to hold an important place for both her and her daughter. What Anna didn't know was that behind the scenes, Elizabeth and Derek were weaving a web of manipulation that would soon endanger everything she had begun to build. The atmosphere at Matthew's mansion had shifted, but this time it wasn't just the lingering grief that had haunted the place for years. It was something more subtle, something more unsettling. Anna could feel it every time she crossed the iron gate, every time her gaze met Matthew's. There was something in his behavior that had changed since Derek's reappearance. The warmth she once felt in her conversations with Matthew seemed to be fading little by little, replaced by a certain coldness that she couldn't ignore. That day, as Anna and Sarah arrived for their usual visit to the mansion, Matthew greeted them with the same courtesy as always, but Anna couldn't help noticing that his smile was weaker and his eyes more distant. Sarah, unaware of the tension, ran to the garden to play, while Anna stayed with Matthew in the foyer. "Are you okay?" Anna asked, searching his face. Matthew nodded, but his response was vague, almost indifferent. "Yes, I just have a lot on my mind." Anna didn't press further, but something inside her began to worry. Derek's words had been echoing in her mind. She knew her ex-husband had the ability to sow doubt and manipulate emotions, but she hadn't thought his influence could reach Matthew so quickly. As they walked together toward the living room, the silence between them was heavy, uncomfortable. Anna wasn't used to this distance, not after all the weeks of closeness and connection they had shared. It felt like something invisible was now separating them, something she couldn't see but was there, preventing the relationship from blossoming as it had before. Once in the living room, Matthew sat down across from Anna, resting his elbows on his knees and clasping his hands together. He seemed nervous, as if he was internally debating something important. "Anna," he finally began, without looking directly into her eyes, "I want to ask you something, and I hope you don't take it the wrong way." Anna's heart raced. She knew she was about to hear something that could change the course of her relationship with Matthew. "Of course, tell me whatever you need to," Anna replied, her voice calm, though inside she felt growing anxiety. Matthew took a deep breath as if trying to gather his courage. "I've been thinking a lot about how our lives have become intertwined so quickly, and I can't help but wonder if all of this is just a coincidence, or if maybe you've seen an opportunity in me," he said, finally lifting his gaze, though his expression was filled with doubt and caution. Anna felt as if the air had been sucked out of her lungs. Matthew's words fell on her like cold, bitter rain. Did he really think she was taking advantage of him? After everything they had shared, the moments of trust and vulnerability, was this the thought that lingered in his mind? "Opportunity," Anna repeated, incredulous. "What do you mean by that, Matthew?" Matthew shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly uneasy about the conversation, but determined to continue. "I don't want to sound unfair, Anna, but I've heard things, comments from people close to me, even from Derek. They suggest that maybe you're getting close to me for other reasons, that what you're looking for isn't just friendship or support, but something more financial." Anna was speechless for a moment. A mix of anger and sadness began to stir inside her. She couldn't believe that after everything she had done for him, after all they had shared, Matthew could think something like that. "Derek!" Anna asked in disbelief. "You're listening to Derek, the man who abandoned me and didn't care about his daughter for years." Matthew frowned but didn't respond immediately. Anna continued, unable to contain her frustration. "I can't believe you're doubting me because of what he says. You know what I've been through, what I've done to take care of Sarah. I've never wanted your money, Matthew. All I've ever wanted was to see you get better, to find some peace after all the pain." Anna's words were sincere, filled with emotion, but despite that, Matthew didn't seem entirely convinced. The seeds of doubt planted by Elizabeth and Derek were now growing, fed by the insecurities he had felt ever since losing his daughter. "I know, Anna, but try to see it from my perspective. I've seen a lot of people take advantage of me in the past. My own circle is full of people who aren't what they seem, and sometimes I don't know who to trust." Anna felt deeply hurt hearing those words. She knew Matthew had been betrayed before, but she couldn't accept that he was placing her in the same category as those people. For weeks, she had believed they were building something real, something based on honesty and mutual support. But now, all of that seemed to be crumbling under Matthew's doubts. "I'm not like those people, Matthew," Anna said, her voice trembling. "I've done everything I can for you and for Sarah. I've never wanted anything from you except for your well-being." Matthew looked at her, his face still tense, but there was a flicker of regret in his eyes. He knew he was being unfair, but the weight of his doubts and insecurities was too heavy. "I'm sorry, Anna. I just needed to ask. I don't want any of this to turn into something that will hurt me again." Anna nodded slowly, trying to hold back the tears threatening to escape her eyes. She knew Matthew was broken, that his wounds hadn't fully healed, but she also knew that she couldn't stay in a relationship where her honesty was constantly questioned. "If you can't trust me, Matthew, I don't know how we can move forward with this," she finally said, standing up from her seat. Matthew looked at her, surprised, as if he hadn't expected that response. Anna had always been patient, understanding, but now he saw that his own doubts and fears were pushing away the one person who had started to bring some hope back into his life. "Anna, I don't want this to end like this," he said, standing up as well, but Anna had already made her decision. "Neither do I, but if you can't trust me, I don't know what else I can do," Anna replied, her voice breaking a little. With that, she turned and left the room, leaving Matthew alone with his thoughts, his regret and his doubts. Outside, Sarah was happily playing in the garden, unaware of the conflict unfolding inside the mansion. Anna, holding back tears, approached her daughter and said softly, "Sweetie, it's time to go." Sarah, surprised by how early they were leaving, didn't question her mother. She simply took her hand, and together they left the mansion, leaving Matthew with his remorse. As they walked home, the silence between Anna and Sarah was heavy. Sarah, always perceptive, noticed that something wasn't right. "Mum, why did we leave so soon?" she finally asked. Anna looked at her, trying to smile, but she knew she couldn't hide the truth. "Sometimes, sweetie, people don't understand everything we do for them, and when that happens, we have to give them space to think." Sarah, though she didn't fully understand, nodded, accepting her mother's explanation. But Anna knew the conflict was far from over. The doubts Matthew had were planted by someone, and in her heart, Anna knew that Derek and Elizabeth were behind all of this. Her intuition told her that things were going to get even more complicated, and that one way or another, she would have to fight for her dignity, for Sarah, and for the truth. The grey sky warned of an impending storm, and the air was charged with palpable tension. Anna had felt it since the moment she woke up that morning. Matthew's words still echoed in her mind, and though she had tried to put them behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was falling apart. Despite the coldness she had felt in their last conversation, something inside her told her there was still hope. But that hope was quickly fading with the arrival of Derek. It was early when the door to her small house was suddenly thrown open, revealing Derek standing in the doorway, his face a mix of anger and arrogance. Anna, startled, dropped the plate she had been washing. The sound of the glass shattering on the floor echoed with the same intensity as the fear beginning to grow in her chest. "What are you doing here, Derek?" Anna asked, her voice tense, trying to stay calm. Derek stepped into the house without being invited, closing the door behind him with a sharp slam. His smile was cynical, and his eyes were filled with a determination that Anna knew all too well. It wasn't the first time she had seen him like this, but this time something was different. "What am I doing here?" Derek repeated, his tone laced with mockery. "I'm here to put an end to this charade, Anna. Enough of playing the perfect family with that rich guy." Anna felt the anger starting to boil inside her. She knew Derek had no right to be there, not after all the years of abandonment, but she also knew he wouldn't leave easily. Derek had always been a manipulator, someone who knew how to push the right buttons to get what he wanted. "I'm not playing anything, Derek. All I'm doing is taking care of our daughter, something you never did," Anna responded, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. Derek stared at her, and for a moment his expression shifted, showing a shadow of bitterness. "Taking care of her?" Derek spat with disdain. "Or are you using that man? Because from where I stand, it looks like you've found an easy way out, and you're using Sarah to make sure he keeps giving you what you want." Derek's words hit Anna like a punch in the gut. She knew this was the image he was trying to paint, not just for her, but also for Matthew. It had been clear from the beginning that Derek had only come back because he thought he could get something out of this new life Anna was building. But now, his intentions went far beyond what Anna had imagined. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Anna responded, feeling tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "Matthew has helped us, yes, but I've never used him. I'm not you, Derek. I don't manipulate people to get what I want." Derek ignored her, stepping closer with slow, calculated steps. There was something in his expression that made Anna take a step back, though she tried to stand her ground. "I'm going to see him, Anna. I'm going to tell him the truth, and when he hears what I have to say, you and your little fantasy life will be over." Derek's voice was low, dangerous. Anna felt a mixture of fear and fury swirling inside her. She knew Derek wouldn't stop until he destroyed everything she had worked so hard to build, and she knew that if he confronted Matthew with these accusations, it could jeopardize what little remained of her relationship with him. "You can't do this, Derek. You have no right," Anna said, feeling desperation creeping in. "Watch me," Derek replied with a cold smile. Before Anna could stop him, Derek stormed out of the house, determined to confront Matthew at his mansion. Anna quickly followed, her heart pounding as she tried to think of a way to stop him. She couldn't let him destroy everything. Not like this. Matthew's mansion loomed larger than ever as they arrived. The grey sky and the first drops of rain that began to fall only added to the tension and drama of the moment. Derek marched toward the door without hesitation, and Anna, desperate, tried to catch up to him before everything spiraled out of control. "Derek, stop!" Anna shouted, but he didn't turn back. The sound of the doorbell echoed in the entrance, and moments later, the door opened to reveal Margaret, the housekeeper, who looked at them in surprise. Before she could say anything, Derek pushed his way inside, forcing Margaret to step back. "Where's Matthew?" Derek demanded, his voice booming in the foyer. Margaret, clearly frightened, looked at Anna for an explanation, but Anna could only shake her head. Things had already spiraled out of control. Matthew appeared at the top of the staircase, confusion and alarm written on his face as he saw Derek in his home. "What's going on here?" Matthew asked, his voice firm. Derek turned to face Matthew, his expression full of determination. "I'll tell you what's going on," Derek said, his tone dripping with venom. "You're being used, Matthew. Anna is using you." Anna felt the ground crumble beneath her feet. The words she had dreaded hearing from the beginning had finally been spoken, and the impact was devastating. She looked at Matthew, hoping to see a sign that he didn't believe what Derek was saying, but what she found in his eyes was doubt, the same doubt that had begun to surface during their last conversation. "Derek, shut up!" Anna screamed, her voice filled with desperation. "You don't know what you're talking about!" Matthew slowly descended the stairs, his eyes fixed on Anna, but he said nothing. Derek seized the silence as an opportunity to keep going. "She's been using you this whole time. I saw it from the beginning. She's only interested in your money, Matthew. Can't you see how her life has changed since she met you?" Derek's voice echoed through the large room. Anna couldn't believe what was happening. The situation was slipping out of her control, and the fear of losing everything was paralyzing her. She knew Derek was lying, but how could she convince Matthew of the truth if he was already filled with doubt? "Matthew, it's not true." "You know it's not true," Anna said, her voice trembling as she tried to hold back tears. I'm not here for your money. I never have been. Matthew stopped a few steps away from Anna, his face tense, torn between what he knew in his heart and the poisonous words Derek was hurling at him. The doubt in his eyes was undeniable, and Anna felt her heart break as she saw everything falling apart. I want to believe you, Anna, Matthew said quietly, but I can't ignore what's happening. All of this. It's been too fast, too unexpected. And now Derek is here, saying these things. Anna couldn't bear it any longer. She knew that if she didn't do something, she would lose everything. She took a step toward Matthew, taking his hand in hers and looking directly into his eyes. Listen to your heart, Matthew, not him. I'm not like Derek, I wouldn't hurt you. I've never wanted anything from you, except to be by your side, to support you and help you heal. Sarah adores you, and Anna hesitated for a moment, but she knew it was time to be completely honest. I do too. Her words hung in the air as Matthew looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of emotions, but before he could respond, Derek, furious at being ignored, stepped forward. Don't listen to her, Matthew. She's a liar, Derek shouted, his face red with anger. But before Derek could say anything more, Matthew raised his hand, silencing him. That's enough, Derek, Matthew said firmly. I won't let you cause any more trouble here. Derek, taken aback by Matthew's sudden firmness, took a step back, but his eyes were full of resentment. You'll regret this, Matthew. You're making a mistake, Derek said before turning around and leaving the mansion, leaving a heavy, tense air behind him. Anna, still trembling from what had just happened, looked at Matthew, hoping he would say something, anything, that would show he still trusted her. But instead, Matthew just stood there, silent, staring at the floor as if processing everything that had just occurred. Finally, he looked up, but his words weren't what Anna expected. I need time, Anna, I need to think, he said in a low voice, before turning and walking away slowly, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the empty foyer. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed through the mansion, and Anna felt that, in that moment, everything she had built was about to collapse. The days following the confrontation at the mansion were dark and heavy for Anna. The storm that had threatened to break in the sky finally did, bringing with it endless rain that seemed to mirror her emotional state. Every drop that fell on the small roof of her house reminded her that her life, which had begun to rebuild in some way, was now in ruins again. Sarah, always perceptive, sensed that something was wrong, even though Anna had done everything possible to maintain a calm facade to protect her daughter. But even the child, with her boundless energy and infectious smile, had started to withdraw, wondering why they weren't visiting the mansion anymore, why Matthew hadn't come for them, and why her mother seemed more distant and sad than ever. Anna knew that sooner or later she would have to face the reality of what had happened. She would have to explain to Sarah what was going on, but she still didn't know how. How could she explain that, after everything? Matthew's doubts and Derek's lies had destroyed what seemed like a new hope. How could she tell her that they might never return to that mansion Sarah loved so much? One afternoon, as the rain continued to pour relentlessly, Sarah approached her mother, who was sitting at the small kitchen table, lost in thought. "Mom, why haven't we seen Matthew lately?" Sarah asked, her voice soft but filled with confusion. Anna felt the knot in her stomach tighten. She knew this conversation was inevitable, but that didn't make it any easier. "Sweetheart," Anna began, unsure how to continue. "Things with Matthew have gotten complicated." Sarah looked at her, waiting for a clearer explanation. "Complicated? Why? Doesn't Matthew want to see us anymore?" Sarah asked, frowning. Anna swallowed hard. She didn't want Sarah to think everything was lost, but she also knew she couldn't lie to her. "Matthew is going through a lot, Sarah. He's had doubts. Things Derek told him that aren't true, but they've made him doubt me, doubt us." Sarah's eyes widened when she heard her father's name. "Dad, what did Dad tell him?" Anna sighed deeply, knowing that now she had to be completely honest. "Derek made Matthew believe that we're with him for his money, that we're using him. But that's not true. And you know that, sweetheart. We've been with Matthew because he's a good person, because we care about him, and because he cares about you too." Sarah was silent, processing what her mother was telling her. Anna could see the confusion and pain in her daughter's eyes, but also something else, a small spark of understanding beginning to grow inside her. "So, why don't we just tell Matthew the truth?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with determination. Anna gave a faint smile at the simplicity of her daughter's answer. If only it were that simple. But she knew things were more complicated than that. The doubt Derek had planted in Matthew wouldn't disappear so easily. "Sometimes the truth isn't enough, Sarah. Sometimes when people are scared or hurt, it's hard for them to hear the truth, even when it's right in front of them," Anna said sadly. Sarah stared at her intently, as if trying to make sense of a world that seemed unfair and confusing. Finally, she nodded, though still with a look of doubt on her face. "But will we see Matthew again?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Anna felt her heart break a little more with that question. She wanted to say yes, that everything would be okay, that things would go back to how they were. But the truth was, she didn't know. She didn't know if Matthew would ever trust her again, if they could ever repair what had been broken. "I don't know, sweetheart, I don't know," Anna replied, unable to stop the tears that began to fill her eyes. Seeing her mother cry, Sarah moved closer and hugged her tightly. Anna, feeling the warmth and innocence of her daughter, hugged her back, letting the tears flow freely down her face. In that moment, as the rain continued to beat against the windows, Anna realized something. No matter how much Derek and Matthew had hurt her, she had something no one could take away. She had Sarah, and she had her dignity. As the days passed, Anna began to regain some of her strength. She knew she couldn't let herself be paralyzed by pain and uncertainty. Derek had reappeared to wreak havoc, and he had succeeded, but Anna wasn't going to let her life fall apart completely. She had survived worse, and she knew she could do it again. One afternoon, while at home, she received an unexpected call. It was Margaret, the loyal housekeeper from Matthew's mansion. "Anna, I'm sorry to call you like this, but I thought you should know," Margaret said, her voice filled with concern. "Elizabeth has been talking to Matthew a lot. I think she's manipulating him, making him believe everything Derek said is true." Anna felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she listened to those words. She had always known that Elizabeth was against her relationship with Matthew, but she hadn't realized how far she would go to keep them apart. "What can I do, Margaret?" Anna asked, feeling desperation begin to overwhelm her. "I don't know, Anna, but I think if you don't do something soon, Elizabeth will succeed in making Matthew close the door on you forever," Margaret replied sincerely. Anna hung up the phone, feeling more powerless than ever. She knew she had to do something, but she didn't know what. She couldn't just show up at the mansion and try to explain everything, not when Matthew had already made it clear that he needed time. But something inside her told her she couldn't give up. Not yet. Finally, after days of emotional torment, Anna made a decision. She knew she couldn't force Matthew to trust her, but she also knew she couldn't let Elizabeth and Derek control the narrative of what had happened. She decided that she had to confront Matthew, talk to him one last time and tell him the whole truth. If after that he still chose to walk away, then there would be nothing more she could do. That afternoon she set off for the mansion with Sarah by her side. When they arrived, the door opened slowly, revealing Margaret, who greeted them with a look of relief and concern. "Matthew is in the study," Margaret said quietly, "but be careful, Anna. Elizabeth is here too." Anna nodded, grateful for the warning. She knew Elizabeth wouldn't stand by idly, but Anna was determined to face her if necessary. She couldn't let the lies continue to control the situation. She walked toward the study, holding Sarah's hand, feeling the weight of what she was about to do. When she reached the door, she took a deep breath before gently knocking. Matthew's muffled voice gave her permission to enter. As she opened the door, she saw Matthew sitting at his desk, his face tense and worried. Elizabeth stood to the side, arms crossed, looking at Anna with disdain. In that moment, Anna realized that this confrontation would define her future. "Matthew, we need to talk," Anna said, her voice steady. Matthew looked up, surprised to see her, but said nothing. Elizabeth, on the other hand, smirked coldly, as if she had already won the battle. "What do you have to say, Anna?" Elizabeth asked sarcastically. another lie to justify your presence here." Anna ignored Elizabeth, keeping her eyes fixed on Matthew. "I didn't come to justify anything. I came to tell you the truth. After that, you can decide whatever you want," Anna said, her voice trembling slightly but resolute. Matthew looked at her, and though his eyes still held doubt, Anna felt there was still a chance he would listen. There had to be. The silence in Matthew's study was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Anna stood near the door, feeling the weight of every gaze. Elizabeth, with a cold smile, watched her, as though she knew she had already won. Matthew, sitting behind his desk, seemed torn between two worlds, the doubts that tormented him and the feelings he still couldn't fully deny. Sarah, standing beside her mother, looked around with a confused expression. She felt the tension but didn't fully understand what was happening. She knew something important was at stake, but all she wanted was for everything to go back to the way it was when Matthew was part of her life, and the mansion was a place where she felt safe. Anna, with her heart pounding in her chest, knew she couldn't delay the conversation any longer. She had come to set things straight and fight for the truth, and she wasn't going to let Elizabeth and Derek destroy everything she had built. "Matthew, I know you have doubts. I know things have gotten complicated since Derek came back, and that Elizabeth has been feeding those doubts," Anna began, her voice firm but filled with emotion. "But what I need you to understand is that everything we've shared has been real. I never wanted anything from you except your friendship and your trust." Elizabeth let out a sarcastic laugh, interrupting Anna. "Friendship?" Elizabeth mocked. "Please, Matthew, can't you see what's obvious? This woman has been manipulating you from the start. She and her daughter showed up just when you were at your weakest, taking advantage of your vulnerability." Anna looked at Elizabeth calmly, refusing to be rattled by her hurtful words. "I never took advantage of Matthew, and you know that," Anna said, addressing Elizabeth directly. "The only one doing the manipulating here is you. From the start, you've wanted to keep Matthew away from anyone who could bring him some hope because you're afraid of losing control. This has always been about your power over him, not about protecting him." Elizabeth stiffened at Anna's words, but she didn't back down. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Everything I've done has been for my brother's well-being, to protect him from people like you," Elizabeth replied coldly. Anna could feel the tension rising, but she stood her ground. She knew that if she couldn't get Matthew to see the truth now, she would lose him forever. "Matthew, I know you're hurting that you've been through so much, but please listen to me. Elizabeth has been controlling your life since your daughter's death, and all she's done is make sure you stay isolated, trapped in your pain. She doesn't want you to heal because that would mean you'd regain control of your life. And that's what she fears the most," Anna said, her voice filled with passion. Matthew, who had remained silent until that moment, finally looked up, and Anna could see the conflict in his eyes. "Anna," Matthew began softly, uncertainty lacing his words. "I don't know what to think. Everything has been so confusing lately. Derek showed up saying things that made me doubt. Elizabeth has been by my side all this time. How can I know who to trust?" Anna took a step forward, moving closer to Matthew, never breaking eye contact. "Trust what you feel, Matthew. Trust what we've shared. Everything Derek has told you is a lie. He didn't come back for Sarah or for me. He only came because he saw an opportunity. And Elizabeth, she loves you, I know that. But she's kept you a prisoner of your own grief because she doesn't know how to deal with her own guilt," Anna said, her words firm and sincere. At this, Elizabeth stepped forward, visibly shaken. "Guilt? What are you talking about?" Elizabeth asked, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. Anna looked her directly in the eyes, feeling that, for the first time, she had struck a nerve. "About what happened with Claudia. You've been carrying the guilt of her death for years, and it's consumed you. You think that keeping Matthew locked in his pain will protect him, but in reality, it's only destroying him. You can't change what happened, Elizabeth, and you can't save your brother by keeping him away from the people who care about him." Elizabeth's face paled, and for a moment her mask of control and coldness seemed to crumble. Her eyes filled with a mix of fury and pain. "You don't know what you're talking about," Elizabeth muttered, her voice shaking. Anna felt that the decisive moment had come. She knew that Elizabeth had been battling the guilt over Claudia's death, and that pain had been the root of her control over Matthew. But she also knew that if Elizabeth didn't face the truth, none of them would ever heal. "Elizabeth, I'm not here to judge you. I know you've suffered too. But this has to end. Matthew deserves a life beyond all this pain, and so do you," Anna said, her voice gentle but firm. Matthew, who had been watching silently, finally stood up from his chair, his gaze fixed on his sister. "Is it true, Elizabeth?" he asked, his voice low but filled with pain. "Have you been controlling everything because you feel guilty?" Elizabeth looked at him, and for a moment it seemed like she was going to deny everything. But then, as if a dam had broken inside her, her eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand, Matthew," Elizabeth said, her voice breaking. "I've always felt that if I had done something different, if I had been more attentive, Claudia would still be here. I couldn't lose you too. I couldn't bear the thought of something happening to you." Matthew stepped toward his sister, but this time not with anger, but with a mixture of compassion and sadness. "Elizabeth, I haven't known how to deal with Claudia's death either, but you can't keep imprisoning me in this pain. You can't keep controlling everything to prevent anything bad from happening. It's time to let go of the past," Matthew said, his voice filled with sincerity. Elizabeth broke down in tears, and Anna watched in silence as Matthew embraced his sister. It was a moment of deep sorrow and redemption. It was clear that both had been suffering in silence, each carrying their own burden of pain and guilt, without knowing how to free themselves from it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Elizabeth pulled away from Matthew, her tears still streaming down her face. "You're right, Matthew," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to protect you." Matthew nodded, saying nothing more. He knew that words couldn't change the past, but he also knew that the first step toward healing was accepting what had happened. Anna, seeing that the tension between the siblings had eased, decided to give them a moment alone. She turned toward the door, but before she could leave, Matthew called out to her. "Anna, wait." She stopped, looking at Matthew with her heart in her throat. "Thank you," Matthew said, his gaze filled with both gratitude and regret. "I'm sorry I doubted you." Anna smiled faintly, feeling that there was still hope after all. "All I want is for you to find the peace you deserve, Matthew." "We all deserve that," Anna replied sincerely. Matthew nodded, and for the first time in a long while, Anna saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. She knew that things weren't entirely resolved, but this was the beginning of something new, something that could heal the wounds of the past. The days following the confrontation at Matthew's mansion felt like the end of a storm. The tension that had surrounded everyone involved slowly began to dissipate, leaving behind a fertile ground for healing and change. For the first time in a long while, Anna felt the weight she had carried on her shoulders start to lift. The relationship between Matthew and his sister Elizabeth was still in the process of healing, but the words they had shared had marked a turning point. Elizabeth, aware of the mistakes she had made, decided to take a step back from controlling every aspect of Matthew's life. Though the guilt still lingered, she understood that the only way to heal was to let go of the past. Matthew, for his part, had begun a journey of reconciliation with himself. The conversation with Anna and the confrontation with Elizabeth had awakened something within him. He had spent too long trapped in a prison of pain and isolation, but now he saw the possibility of living a different life. A life filled with potential and perhaps even love. A few weeks after the confrontation, Anna and Sarah returned to the mansion, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. There were no doubts or tensions in the air, only a sense of hope and renewal. Matthew was waiting for them in the garden, where the afternoon sun shone over the flowers, creating a peaceful and serene environment. "Look, Mum, the garden's more beautiful than ever," Sarah exclaimed as she ran toward the flowers, laughing joyfully. Anna smiled, watching her daughter's happiness, feeling that finally, after all the chaos and pain, they were finding a place where they could be happy. Matthew greeted them with a warm smile, and as Anna approached, he gently took her hand. For the first time in a long while, there was no doubt in his eyes, only gratitude and a peace he hadn't known in years. "Thank you for coming back," Matthew said softly, giving Anna's hand a light squeeze. Anna smiled and nodded, feeling a deeper connection with him than ever before. "I couldn't do anything else," Anna replied sincerely. "I knew this was the place we belonged." They sat together on one of the garden benches, watching as Sarah explored the area with her usual energy. Matthew took a deep breath before speaking again, as if gathering the courage to say something important. "Anna, I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. About you, about Sarah, about what I want for my life," Matthew began, his voice soft but firm. "For too long, I've lived trapped in the past, letting the pain of losing Claudia and the guilt I felt keep me from moving forward. But you've shown me that there's another way, that I can find peace and happiness if I'm willing to open myself to it." Anna looked at him, feeling that his words came from the deepest part of his heart. It had been a difficult journey, full of obstacles and misunderstandings, but finally, Matthew was beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. "I've always seen you as a strong person, Matthew. Even in your darkest moments, you knew there was something more waiting for you," Anna said with a smile. "And I'm glad that you're finally seeing that for yourself." Matthew looked at her with an expression full of affection and gratitude. "What I want most now is to live a full life, not just for myself, but for the people who matter to me. And you and Sarah, you've become a big part of that life," Matthew said, his voice full of emotion. "I don't know what the future holds, but I want us to discover it together." Anna felt her heart race at his words. She had never expected life to lead her here. But now, standing before Matthew, she knew that everything that had happened had a purpose. They had found something real amidst all the chaos, something worth protecting and building. "I would love that," Anna replied, smiling broadly. For a moment they remained silent, enjoying the peace of the garden and each other's presence. It was a silence filled with unspoken promises, with the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. In the days that followed, life at the mansion continued to evolve. Anna and Sarah visited often, but no longer as distant guests. They were now part of that place, part of the new life Matthew was building. Elizabeth, though still present in Matthew's life, had learned to take a step back and allow her brother to make his own decisions. She no longer tried to control his future, instead beginning to accept that her own healing process required time and patience. Derek, on the other hand, had disappeared from their lives. Realizing he couldn't manipulate Matthew or Anna to get what he wanted, he left just as he had arrived, with empty promises and lies. Anna knew he might try to reappear one day, but she also knew she was stronger now and would never allow him to interfere in her life again. Matthew, Anna, and Sarah began to form an unconventional but genuine family. Sarah, happy to have Matthew as a constant figure in her life, filled the mansion with laughter and energy. For her, Matthew wasn't a replacement for her father, but someone who had brought peace and stability to their lives. One day, while they were all sitting in the garden enjoying a sunny afternoon, Matthew took Anna's hand and looked at her with a smile. "This place, this garden, has never been as beautiful as it is now," Matthew said, looking at Anna and Sarah. "And I know it's because you two are here." Anna smiled, feeling that everything finally made sense. "We feel the same way," Anna replied, gently squeezing his hand. "This place is special, not just for its beauty, but because this is where we started to heal." Matthew nodded, and for the first time the mansion, which had witnessed so much pain, felt like a true home. A place where the wounds of the past began to heal, where the shadows of loss were replaced by the light of a hopeful future. As the sun set on the horizon, Anna, Matthew, and Sarah remained in the garden, laughing and enjoying each other's company. They had gone through tough times, but now together, they knew that the future ahead was one full of possibilities. And most importantly, it was a future they were ready to build together. Thank you for joining us on this incredible story of courage, love, and redemption. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more exciting stories like this. See you in the next video.